share a psalm with you tonight, Psalm 40. Just a few verses from that psalm I want to give a few thoughts on. I want to read you the first 4 verses of Psalm 40, a psalm of David. David writes, I waited patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He also brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay. He has set my feet upon a rock and established my steps. He has put a new song in my mouth, praise to our God. Many will see it and fear and will trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. David's life was in a mess. He described the circumstances that he found himself in like being in a pit. This was no ordinary pit. He says it was a horrible pit. And I'm sure there are times in all of our lives when we find ourselves in exactly that same pit as David found himself in. The circumstances might be different, but the pit remains as real to us as it was to David. This horrible pit that we find ourselves in. It might be a breakdown in relationships that has put us there. It may be sickness or a long-standing health problem that has put us there. It may be finances that we're struggling with. The circumstances differ for us all, but we know that when we are in that pit, it is indeed horrible. And David knew that there was no way out of this pit that he found himself in. He describes the pit as having miry clay. His feet were well stuck. He knew that he needed some help to get out. You know, folks, we all come to that point in our lives when we find ourselves in circumstances that are far from pleasant. We know that we need some outside intervention to get us out. We can't get out ourselves. If ever David was to be free, he knew he needed help. David, in his great need, cried out to the Lord. He sought God to help him. I wonder, where do we turn when we find ourselves in that horrible pit? You know, some people make God their last resort. They try everyone and everything else, and when that fails, they may turn to God. But David, his first port of call was to cry upon the Lord. He says, blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust. And David was crying out to the Lord. He was pleading with God. I don't know how long he found himself in these circumstances. Weeks, months, years, we don't know. What we do know that his answer for deliverance was not forthcoming. And I don't know how long you've been in the pit that you find yourself in. It might have been weeks, it might have been months. I know for some people who are listening tonight, it might have been there for years. And you've cried out to God like David did for help, for deliverance. And like David, your answer hasn't been forthcoming. Notice what David said. He said, I waited patiently for the Lord. You don't have to wait patiently when you receive an answer straight away. When the answer is more or less forthcoming straight away when you pray. You don't need patience for that. But David said, I waited patiently for the Lord, so we know that his answer wasn't forthcoming. The Bible says, hope deferred, that which we hope for, when it doesn't happen, it makes the heart sick. And I'm sure that David despaired. There were times he would despair if he would ever be free. Now, I don't know how long you've been praying for for God to intervene in your circumstances, to bring about that healing, to bring about that miracle in your life, to bring about that intervention in the circumstances you find yourself in. And even though there seems to be no deliverance, I want to encourage you to do what David did in this psalm. He says, I waited patiently for the Lord. I want you to notice he was persistent. He didn't throw the towel in. He kept asking, he kept seeking, he kept knocking. He had put his trust in the Lord. And he had faith to believe that his day of deliverance, his miracle, his healing was coming. I waited patiently for the Lord. But it's all right to wait patiently, but, you know, when we're waiting for an answer, but to wait with faith, to wait with expectancy, believing that our answer is coming. David didn't stop crying out to the Lord. He believed that his answer was forthcoming. It would come. There's a psalm where he says, I would have fainted. I would have thrown the towel in unless I believed to see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I want to encourage you tonight to wait patiently in faith. Your breakthrough, your deliverance, your miracle, it's coming. David acknowledged that God had heard his cry. He says he inclined his ear to me. Let me tell you, friends, your prayers have not been in vain. That which you're asking God for, God has heard. And there is a perfect time, a perfect moment that God has to bring about that answer to prayer. The day of deliverance for David came. And he could say, he also brought me up out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay. You see, friends, God's timings and his ways are not our ways. God is working with each one of us. Paul was able to say, I know that in all things God is working together for the good of those who love him. And in every circumstance, every situation we're in, the prayers that we prayed, the cries out to God for God to help us, they haven't fallen on deaf ears. God has heard your cry. God knows your circumstances. The Bible says the steps of a good man, and that's a good woman as well, are ordered by the Lord, and the Lord delights in his way. David's moment of deliverance came. That moment when he was set free, when he was brought out of that horrible pit, when the despair that he had experienced, he must have thought many times that his prayers were not being answered. But there was that moment when God brought him out. He waited expectantly in faith, and his plea was heard, and that despair was replaced by joy. He says he put a new song in my mouth, even praise to my God. You see, he knew who had delivered him. He directed his prayers to the one who had set him free, the one who had released him from his horrible pit. I want to encourage you tonight. Whatever pit you might find yourself in, as horrible as it might be, and you know there's no way out, keep praying. Be persistent. Make the Lord your trust. Have faith in God. Believe that no matter how long you are waiting patiently, expectantly, and in faith. Have faith to believe that your day of deliverance, your day of freedom is coming. The Bible says here, many will see it. What? What God has done for you. Many will see it. Many will see the mighty hand of God upon your life, and they will put their trust in the Lord too. You see, what happens to you and the way God brings his miracle about in your life has a knock-on effect upon those who are around you. Many will see it, and the Bible says here, they will trust in the Lord. Isn't it wonderful that others can find their trust in God through the trust that you've experienced and the trust that you've come through and the deliverance that God has brought about in your life. So God bless you, and look forward to the day when you're in that horrible pit. Your day of deliverance is coming. God bless.